Yes. So, during this process, what do you think is the hardest part about working in as as a part of legislation.gov.uk, and what do you think is the part that you enjoy the most about
I think that the hardest part is just sort of understanding sort of being a part of government. There are sometimes issues around funding. It's not always easy to do that. Working for the civil service is quite rewarding because you do feel like you're doing something for the public good, and as I say, one of the main motivations for joining was I was very much aware of that service, and I realized how important it was for members of the public to have that access. And so it felt the best part of the job was sort of feeling that you're sort of at the front line of democracy, essentially, by making sure that the law was available for people to see and to understand. um, but yeah, there were certain difficulties just around sort of funding for certain things and certain projects, and that can obviously change depending on the government and things like that. And there's even like a weird thing where I during the time that I was there, the Brexit legislation was coming through, and I was sort of pro Remain, and it's difficult to be working on something where politically you're opposed to it, but because it's been passed by Parliament and because there's been a referendum, you obviously have that duty there to actually fulfil the will of Parliament and the will of the people. So there's certain difficulties in that regard.
it? Yes. So it's really interesting to see how you change your career from like teaching to becoming a civil servant, and then right now working on Westlaw. So, what caused you to change from one to the other, and then changed to Westlaw?
um I think that within teaching, there's sort of there's a lot going on in higher education at the moment, where there is much more focus placed on academic research as compared to actually teaching students and making sure that they have a good experience. And that differs from university to university, but there is a general trend within the higher education environment that leads more towards valuing that research over offering quality of teaching. And with that change, I didn't really like the way that was going. For me, it's always been about sort of helping students and making sure that they get the most out of their experience in higher education, rather than being sat in like a dusty office with a load of books and doing my own research for 20 years that no one will eventually read. So that was probably the reason why I left higher education. I enjoyed working at legislation.gov.uk, because of that democratic element. I think that by the end there was just certain budgetary pressures, and there wasn't enough sort of support really in terms of um, just the way that projects were run, things like that. I think that they probably needed more funding than they were getting. And so Westlaw is kind of, I guess, like the private sector version of legislation.gov.uk. So it was kind of a natural fit for me. And I still do good work there, but obviously it's kind of behind a paywall. So I've kind of gone to the dark side a little bit there. But, there's less of those same issues.
Yes. So, how do you think these experiences impact your view on the UK legal system as a whole? So, from like a lecturer to working as a civil servant, and right now as a researcher.
It's difficult to say because I think that's kind of like a very broad question. Um, I think that it's certainly increased my understanding of the legal system and also some of like the politics that's involved. Um, I think it's just sort of like a greater understanding that I think when I started my degree, and maybe even when I was starting before teaching, it was kind of like the law was a perfect whole, and there was sort of like certain debates on the outskirts around how we should approach legal questions and things. But I think that my understanding now is that there's sort of like maybe a greater number of questions, and that we should continue to challenge aspects of the law that we don't agree with, even if they run to the heart of what we would consider standard practice for the law. In other words, just because something has been done in a certain way for the past 50, 100, 200 years, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way to do it. And that I think that the system is certainly open to abuse, and it's worrying that that is certainly possible.
Yes. So you said how you were specialized in like jurisprudence. So do you think you're a pragmatist in terms of viewing the legal system, or how would you like identify yourself as?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure I am necessarily much of a pragmatist. I think pragmatists are sort of better at getting things done. I guess I'm sort of more of like I try and think a bit more deeply about things without necessarily there being like a sort of practical objective. So if I see that there is a problem in the law with the law, my initial thought isn't, oh well, that means that this is a policy that's supported by the Scottish National Party, so they need to get this many number of seats in order to get through it. I think my view is a bit more philosophical, and sort of thinking, okay, well, if this is the way that I think that the law should change, then maybe we need to sort of, if that was a policy that benefited Scotland, for example, then we need to think more clearly about Scottish independence and what does that mean for the United Kingdom as a whole, and is it correct that Scotland should break away from the rest of the United Kingdom? Should they have that opportunity to do so? So I guess it's a little bit more philosophical than my approach than pragmatist, which isn't very helpful. But that's the way I look at things.